Hai, Assalamualaikum and salam UiTM di hatiku to all panels and our supervisor, Ms. Syahidah Abdul Razak, also to fellow junior researchers. Today, we from Group 81 will be presenting on our ADS555 Viva presentation titled Students' Awareness on Voting Participation in General Election 15 amongst UiTM SEREMBAN students. This is our group team researchers to conduct the study. The first researcher is Muhamad Mukhlis bin SHAHRIM, and the second one is AIMAN bin HAIRUL ATHAM. Firstly, we start with the research background. This research study is about to determine the students' awareness on voting participation in General Election 15. Mentioning towards the previous General Election series, young voters at that time were not cared for elections. This is taken into concern as the younger generation is the next generation of national leadership. But the situation has begun to change. Since General Election 12, young voters have started to acknowledge their roles in national politics. This can be seen towards the implementation of Undi 18. According to Melo and Sheikh Abdul Rahman, Undi 18 has been approved in the Parliament to uphold the recognition of young people, starting at the age of 18, in reshaping the country's democratic, political, and administrative system. Hence, young people should be recognized as a group that can choose the future and direction of the country. We continue with the problem statement that leads to the idea of conducting this study. Generally, most of young people, including students, are not interested in registering as voters because they are fed up with the instability of the current political landscape, and they expect a change in the selection of candidates who are not just a political champions, but able to serve the people's interests. This can be proved by which 3.6 million of young people aged 21 and above have not registered as voters in the GE14. In terms of awareness, the youth mostly tend to not bother about the election, and among the reasons often given was that they were busy with studies and busy with work. Overall, the level of youth political involvement is currently concerning. Moving forward on research questions, the following research questions are determined to point out the purpose of this study. So, the first question is, what is the level of awareness on voting participation in General Election 15 amongst UiTM SEREMBAN students? The second one is, what is the relationship between political campaign, media as source of information, and level of education toward the students' awareness on voting participation in General Election 15? For the third one is, what is the main determinant that influence the students' awareness on voting participation in General Election 15? Now, we will be discussing on research objectives. The following research objectives will be used as guideline to develop for a better understanding towards the students' awareness on voting participation in general election. So, the first objective is to determine the level of awareness on voting participation in General Election 15 amongst UiTM SEREMBAN students. The second objective is to examine the relationship between political campaign, media as source of information, and level of education toward the students' awareness on voting participation in General Election 15. And the last objective is to identify the main determinant that influence the students' awareness on voting participation in General Election 15. We now reach on the conceptual framework. The figure shows that there are two types of variable. The first is dependent variable, which is students' awareness on voting participation in general election. This dependent variable is determined by three independent variables, which are political campaign, media as source of information, and level of education. Thus, these two variables has its significance relationship to conduct this study. That's it for now. I will give my attention to Muhamad Mukhlis. Thank you.
My name is Muhamad Mukhlis bin SHAHRIM. I will present about the methodology. Methodology used in this research, which is for the research design, we use qualitative method. Next is sampling technique. For the sampling technique, we use stratified sampling. And then the data analysis. For the data analysis, we use descriptive statistic, Pearson correlation, and multiple regression. And then for the unit of analysis, we use individual refer to the student of University Teknologi Mara Seremban 3. Next is data collection. For data collection, we use online questionnaire, which is Google form. Then for the data measurement, we use Likert scale. And then for the sample is 316 student of University Teknologi Mara Seremban 3. Then we will continue with hypothesis development. In this research, we have 3 hypotheses. Hypothesis number 1 is there is high level of student awareness on voting participation in General Election 15 among students in UiTM Seremban 3. Number 2, the next hypothesis, there is a positive significant relationship between political campaign, media as a source of information, and level of education toward student awareness on voting participation in general election. And the last hypothesis is media as sources of information is the main determinant that led to student awareness toward on voting participation in general election 15. Then we will continue to the finding. Based on this table, it shows the demographic profile of the respondent. Also in this table, we can see the rate of voting registration in general election 15. Out of 316 students participate in this research, there are 243 students has registered as voters, which is the percent is 67.5. While there is 117 students still not registered in general election 15, which is 32.5% student. Then we will continue to the main finding. In this main finding, we will try to see whether the hypothesis developed can be accepted or not. For the hypothesis number 1, there is a high level of student awareness toward voting participation among students in UiTM Seremban 3. From the analysis that was done, the result shows that 243 from 360 students that has registered as a voters. So awareness on voting participation in general election 15. From the analysis, all the p-value of these 3 independent variables are less than 0.05. So it means that hypothesis number 2 can be accepted. And for the hypothesis number 3, media as sources of information has the most important factors that lead to student awareness on voting participation in general election 15. It shows in the analysis, it has shown that the beta value for this media as source information is the lowest, which is 0.457. So the hypothesis number 3 can be accepted. And we will continue to the limitation of the studies. Number 1 is measure to collect the data. The data were collected by online questionnaire, which is Google form. From this, student who answers these questionnaires will maybe have answered it casually and not truthfully. So the data maybe is not rightfully correct. Number 2 is lack of research for studies on the subject. There has been much research done in this topic for these studies, which is it has made the researcher to struggle to find sources of knowledge and data on the subject. And number 3 is the sample size. The sample size is too small, and if the research sample is too small, the significant relationship from the data will be difficult. Next is recommendation for the future research. Number 1 is choose different independent variable. This is to ensure that the result and the future research can add a much more variety in this research. Second is use a different population sample. This is because a population and sample has its own characteristic. This will add more variation and give a lot of different from previous studies. And number 3 is use a different method of data collection. Researchers in the future should use a more suitable data collection method, which is researchers can find it much more convenient, and researchers can choose the most appropriate way to use.
In conclusion, this study proves that students in UiTM SEREMBAN are well aware towards the General Election 15 and ready to vote. This means the objectives of this study has been fulfilled based on the test that has been evaluated in Chapter 4 in order to validate the hypothesis in Chapter 2. As a result, all of the 3 hypotheses indicated have been accepted. There are also significant relationship between all variables, and the result shows that media is the main determinant that influences students to vote in General Election 15. At last, we recommend to introduce political curriculum at university to increase the level of awareness on political system in Malaysia. So, that's all from our presentation. Thank you for your time and see you next time.